So, Nintendo went ahead and dropped the successor to the Switch 1, the creatively named Nintendo Switch 2. I figured while I'm getting the next Spyro video ready, I would go ahead and drop my first impressions on the Switch 2 and the newly released Mario Kart. This isn't meant to be some in-depth review on the Nintendo Switch 2 or Mario Kart, but rather my first impressions as an early adopter.
I'm also not covering some of the controversy this console has caused. Everyone has the right to their opinion, and this console has rightfully pissed people off, but people are also rightfully excited for the next generation of Nintendo's home console business. If you see someone in the comments who isn't in love with the Switch 2, please remember it's not your job to convince them to like it, and if you see someone in the comments who really enjoys the Switch 2, also, please remember it's not your job to convince them to hate it.
With that being said, I collect video games, and physical media is how I primarily choose to consume video games. In fact, if a game doesn't have a physical release, odds are I'm gonna skip it. Alan Wake 2 is a great example. I didn't touch it until they made a physical print, and I am glad I did. All the DLC on one disc and a download code for Alan Wake 1, sign me up. I'm gonna get it out of the way now though, I likely won't ever have much coverage on anything that is on a game keycard. If I ever do acquire a game keycard like I did with Bravely Default, it's likely going to be something that I beat and immediately get out of my collection, and not something that's meant to stay in my collection.
Speaking of adding games to the collection, as someone with a fairly large Switch 1 collection, I love how the Switch 2 cases look. I like the red cases, I love how the spines actually have artwork now, and I love the red cartridges. It genuinely is really damn cool and goes a long way in terms of presentation.
I'm also going to get this out of the way now. The Nintendo Switch 2 is by far Nintendo's most underwhelming console release.
I want to start with the good before I get into the bad, however. The Switch 2 is noticeably bigger than the Switch 1, and the native boost in power it gives games is appreciated. Games like Mario Odyssey and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet come with updates to make them run better, which is very, very nice.
In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's case, it makes it a lot easier to stay immersed when the game isn't making the console beg for mercy.
The Switch 2 also feels very premium. The texture is nice, and the Joy-Con magnetically attaching never gets old, and also addresses the issues with the Joy-Con rails on the Switch 1. For those of you who are unaware, if you played on your Switch 1 for a long time, sometimes after a while the Joy-Con will just begin to slip out of the rails on the original console. The build quality is overall much better on the Switch 2, as your Joy-Con aren't constantly slipping out anymore.
Compatibility is also fantastic. All of my Switch 1 accessories and Switch 1 games work with the Switch 2. This means that out of the box, me and my girlfriend had more than enough to play multiplayer Mario Kart together, as my old Pro Controller and Joy-Con still work with the Switch 2.
The mouse features are also a very welcome addition. As someone who prefers to play FPS games on PC, I'm extremely excited to give Metroid Prime 4 a chance with mouse controls. I'm hoping more titles get mouse support like some of the other Doom titles. I also love how both Joy-Con can be used as mice, as opposed to only the left or right side, as a typical keyboard and mouse setup has the mouse on the right side of the keyboard.
However, it is entirely inexcusable that Nintendo is still using the same sticks on the Joy-Con 2 as the Joy-Con 1. It is 2025, there should be no reason that my Dreamcast controller is more reliable than my Joy-Con. I know how to repair this stuff, but for somebody without the know-how, these things are likely just as prone to drift as the last guys.
Now then, what about what I didn't like? Well, this console has the least personality of any Nintendo console I've ever seen. Even in the past, when a console was a successor to another console, there would be more to differentiate them. For example, a Super Nintendo has an entirely different vibe to the NES, and the Wii U has an entirely different vibe to the Wii, despite their clear similarities. A lot of this comes down to the complete lack of creativity in the UI. I give Sony a lot of crap for the PS5 UI, however, the PS5 does feel like a different piece of hardware to the PS4, and a lot of that comes down to the different UI and the different sound effects present within the PS5. The Switch 2 just feels soulless, and that's really jarring coming from Nintendo. I guess the eShop is different on account of the fact that it actually fucking works. A lot of people might say, well, this is just the second Switch and that's all it's trying to be, but look at PlayStation. All the PlayStations are just numbered successors to one another, but you have people with fond nostalgia over something as simple as their startup noises. The PS1, PS2, and PS3 even have borderline identical controllers, yet they all have unique identities from one another without even factoring in any games. I want to make it clear, I'm not some Nintendo hater either. The vast majority of my gaming collection is Nintendo titles. In fact, I was probably too much of a fan growing up, completely ignoring valid criticisms, especially as a young teen. Now, however, I find the Switch 2 has none of that signature Nintendo charm that all of their previous consoles have. Think of the GameCube or the Wii. Both of these consoles are iconic, whether it's for the silly handle or memorable UI music. The Switch 2 genuinely has none of that. It's also really annoying that the console doesn't have an OLED version out the gate. I get it, this is probably their way of getting people to double dip, and based on how many Switch 1s I own as a collector, I don't think their strategy is completely unfounded. But by 2025, after playing on my Switch 1 OLED for so long, it feels pretty annoying to go back to an LCD screen. This is also one of the single weakest day one launch lineups I've ever seen in my entire life. The Switch 1 was a major success, a lot of people had one, so Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom don't really provide much in the way of hype, as they're just prettier versions of the game with stable frame rates.
How dare you forget about the Zelda Notes app!
Also, there's the GameCube games. I got the GameCube controller from Nintendo, and I love the controller, but what the hell is this lineup? 3 games? Listen, I love F-Zero GX, I will never complain about that, but 3 games is far too little when these are retro GameCube titles on a console with Mario Kart as its main attraction right now. I guess you're not technically paying for the GameCube games, and the overall expansion pass comes with a lot more, but for something advertised as a selling point for the Switch 2, this is a pitiful lineup. If these were playable on Switch 1, I'd have no negative things to say, but again, as a selling feature for the new upgraded console, this is just plain bad. Even some of the other day one launch titles are nothing more than ports of pre-existing games or multi-platform releases. Games that have either been multi-platform for a while, or portable for a while thanks to the Steam Deck and other similar handhelds. The novelty of portable versions of console games has worn off. I'm not going to jump for joy at portable versions of pre-existing games that can already be enjoyed on the go on less expensive hardware. Mario Kart World is genuinely the most riveting part of this console's launch, which is a significant step down considering the Switch 1 had the next generation of home console Zelda available on the go day one. Mario Kart just doesn't have enough meat on its bones to carry a console launch.
Speaking of Mario Kart, let's dive into it. Mario Kart World is a confusing little title. At its best, it provides some of the best entertainment in the entire Mario Kart franchise, and at its worst, it fails to live up to the sheer amount of content that its predecessor had even at launch.
Again, I want to start with the good. This is by far the prettiest Mario Kart game I've ever seen. Colors pop, and the courses genuinely look their best. Rainbow Road is a feast for the eyes. The game also controls really well, and the knockout mode is the best thing to happen to Mario Kart since the release of Double Dash. It's fun, and it's extremely tense, especially with friends. All of the goofy, funny characters also give the game a lot of charm and a unique identity compared to its predecessor.
Long live the cow, baby!
The soundtrack is also fire. Some of these remixes are genuinely amazing. The tracks also feel a lot more lively. The generic 3-lap setup is mostly gone and replaced with these really unique changing courses. Races also link into one another, giving the world of Mario Kart World more personality and making it feel much more realized. Before I get into the negatives, I think the game slots itself in pretty well amongst the franchise. It doesn't take much to beat Super Mario Kart, however this game easily beats Mario Kart 64, Mario Kart Advance, Mario Kart Wii, Mario Kart 7, and base Mario Kart 8 for me. But I think Mario Kart Double Dash, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and Mario Kart DS give this game a run for its money. First of all, the single-player content is pretty lacking. Mario Kart DS had mission mode, which went a long way in giving solo players a lot to do. I found that after roaming the world and 3-starring the cups, there wasn't much else to do other than unlock things like characters and stickers. The open world also has these pretty basic challenges, but other than making you ooh and ah for the first time, they don't provide much longevity or replay value to the game. Don't get me wrong, that is usually the name of the game in Mario Kart, and the open world is pretty cool for the first time, but the novelty kind of wears off after a while. You can race around in the open world with your friends as well, but there's no game modes to play with them in the open world. I think it's bizarre how limited the battle mode feels in a game where it arguably had the most potential when you factor in the very open world the game's based on.
I just feel like the open world could have been so much more.
The multiplayer is also beyond stupid. You cannot queue into public matches with a group of your friends. If you and 3 other friends want to do knockout mode, for example, it's just the 4 of you versus the CPU. This is completely unacceptable in this modern age to have matchmaking that is so lacking. I also feel like the open world took away from the actual amount of courses you can play. Mario Kart World has a pretty surprising lack of cups and courses. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe had a lot more to provide as a base game and is still on sale for $30 less where I am. Tack on the fact that if you get Nintendo Switch Online plus the expansion pass, you get the bonus DLC they made for the Switch version as well. I just don't think the value proposition is here for Mario Kart World as it stands. The open world or free roam part of the game just doesn't provide enough content in comparison.
Mario Kart World is a really interesting and captivating title in some ways, but drops the ball in some really jarring ways as well. For $110 Canadian before tax for a physical copy, unfortunately, I think your money is better spent elsewhere. It's just not feature complete enough.
All in all, I think the Switch 2 is kinda strange. It lacks the personality of other Nintendo consoles, and its only really new title is lacking compared to its predecessor, which is still available. However, I think that the Switch 2 has a lot of potential. It's already slated to have a better first year in terms of games compared to the PS4 and 5 with Donkey Kong and Metroid Prime 4. I also think, even as far as cross-gen games go like Metroid Prime 4, the mouse feature does a good job at separating the two versions in the same way reversing the Wii and GameCube versions of Twilight Princess made those two versions distinct.
I think the Switch 2 will have a really good first year, but as far as a day one launch goes, it's really weak. You had far more to experience with Breath of the Wild on the go with the Switch 1. However, the price tag on games like Mario Kart World leave much to be desired when you think of the fact that you can play arguably more feature-complete games on the same console for less money.
So should you buy a Switch 2? If you already have a large lineup of Switch 1 games, I don't think upgrading to the Switch 2 is an awful idea. Lots of games like Witcher or Doom 2016 run with much more stable frame rates, so there is some merit to upgrading. And if you have a Nintendo Switch Online plus Expansion Pass subscription, the GameCube titles are there, I guess, along with Switch 2 upgrades for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. However, I don't think Mario Kart World is worth what Nintendo is asking for it. It's not bad by any means, but it's overpriced for what you get. All in all, I don't regret my purchase of the console. I think I'll really enjoy playing through some older titles again on this new hardware. However, I really wish I waited for a sale or something on Mario Kart. This wasn't a good use of 124 Canadian dollars after tax, and I think I would have had more fun if I just bought Sonic X Shadow and Bravely Default instead, even if they are on keycards, as I could have just traded them in or sold them once I was done.
Let me know what you guys think of the Switch 2 down in the comments below. Do you want one? Do you already have one? What do you think of Mario Kart World if you ended up buying it? I'll catch you guys next time when we come back for Spyro 2. Thank you so much for watching.